Okay. I think we're about ready to begin. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone viewing on the internet as well. I'm Tom Fitton. I'm president of Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch is a conservative, nonpartisan educational foundation dedicated to promoting transparency, accountability, and integrity in government politics and the law. Through its educational endeavors, Judicial Watch advocates high standards of ethics and morality in our nation's public life and seeks to ensure that political and judicial officials obey the law and do not abuse the powers entrusted to them by the American people. In the area of illegal immigration, we advance this mission through education, investigations, and, when necessary, litigation. We educate Americans about the problems associated with illegal immigration. We investigate and uncover how the government fails to enforce the law or disobeys it. And we go to court to try to enforce and defend the strong enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. Our panel this afternoon will take a look at ongoing and upcoming battles over the enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. The immigration debate is not abating. I can think of few other issues that show the vast disconnect between everyday Americans and the political elites. Americans want the rule of law enforced. They want the federal government to secure the border. They don't want tax dollars to help subsidize illegal aliens. They don't want sanctuary cities. Americans just don't like it when people cut in line. Judicial Watch conducted an election day poll of actual voters in partnership with the polling company. We asked a question that reflected on the recent debate over Arizona's SB 1070, the immigration enforcement law, now being attacked by the Obama administration in court. And our poll asked voters whether local law enforcement officers should be more involved, less involved, or as involved as they are now in enforcing federal immigration laws. An impressive 53% of voters thought local law enforcement should be more involved, and 26% thought local police should be as involved as they are now. So more than 75% of respondents urged local officers to either maintain or increase their level of involvement in combating illegal immigration. You know, incredibly, only 15% of voters thought local police should be less involved in enforcing federal immigration laws. So in light of this, what has Congress been up to? Well, the Senate today votes on the DREAM Act, which would reward illegal aliens who brought their children illegally into our country by allowing these children to become citizens after a time. And impatient with the U.S. Constitution and the prerogatives of the legislative branch in Congress, the Obama administration, of course, isn't even waiting for the DREAM Act or any other amnesty proposal to pass. You know, you don't have to read past the subject header of a recently released smoking gun memo to get a clue as to what the Obama administration is up to. Here's the title: Administrative Alternatives to Comprehensive Illegal Immigration Reform. In short, the Obama administration is considering amnesty through executive fiat. Obama's top political appointees in the agency charged with enforcing our immigration law, U.S. Customs Enforcement, are spending their time thinking of ways not to enforce the law and how to bypass the elected representatives of the people to grant mass amnesty through a raw abuse of executive power. And while the Obama administration continues with its stealth amnesty strategy, it is in the midst of an unprecedented legal assault against the state through the litigation against SB 1070, Arizona's common sense new illegal immigration law. And today the Supreme Court heard arguments from business interests and left-wing illegal alien advocates trying to torpedo yet another Arizona law, the Legal Arizona Workers Act, which is legislation designed, a law that was passed and signed into effect by Janet Napolitano, of all people, designed to penalize Arizona businesses that knowingly hire illegal aliens. Now, our panelist here, incoming Arizona State Senate President Russell Pearce, was the author and driving force behind both SB 1070 and the Workers Act that was under discussion at the Supreme Court today. So you can see that with all the states about to follow Arizona's lead and SB 1070 in other areas, and the controversy of the Obama administration's approach to illegal immigration, we have a lot to talk about. Now, we're supposed to have two panelists here today. Joining Senator Pearce also, we hope, will be Congressman Steve King, but I understand that whenever you invite a congressman to an event like this, you always run the risk of them not coming because they're not masters of their own schedule, and they are at the beck and call of the leadership there, and I understand there's a vote that's been called in the House. So it's iffy whether he'll be here. I'm sure he'll try to get here if he's able to. But in the meantime, we have a great resource to tell us what's happening at the state level and what ought to be done, presumably at the federal level, in Arizona State Senator Russell Pearce, who is, as I said, the incoming president of the Arizona State Senate. Russell is a fifth-generation Arizonan and is married to Luann. They have 5 children and 13 grandchildren? 14 grandchildren. Congratulations. Yes. He attended the University of Phoenix and, yes, Harvard University, I guess the School of Government there. He has a long and storied career of public service to the people of Arizona, including 23 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, where he rose to the rank of Chief's Deputy. He was elected to the Arizona House in 2000 and to its Senate in 2008. Senator Pearce has been behind immigration enforcement initiatives or legislation of note in recent years. Virtually anything of note in recent years that took place in Arizona on immigration enforcement, Senator Pearce was behind it. And of course, as I said, most famously, SB 1070. And to show you his philosophy of government, I saw a quote that he had on his website talking about his role at the Appropriations Committee. He says, I am the gatekeeper, not the gift giver. This money comes from labor of dads and moms who have the right to keep the fruits of their labor. Would we be so lucky as to have more senators and congressmen and other elected officials who see themselves as protecting the tax dollar rather than as the guy who's in charge of spending the tax dollar? Judicial Watch is proud to represent Russell Pearce in his effort to defend 1070. We filed a brief for him on his behalf. Our lawyers did with the Supreme Court to defend the Workers Act that was under discussion today. So if Congressman King shows up, I will talk more about him. But in the meantime, we'll listen to Senator Pearce discuss things a little bit more up here, and then hopefully open the floor up to questions. So if I could remind you also, because this is being broadcast, it would be helpful if you turned off or silenced any cell phones you have, if you could double check that as we get into Senator Pearce's remarks. Senator Pearce?
Thank you. And I do thank Tom for providing me the opportunity to be here today. We have some battles that are battles of epic proportion going on in this country today. Either we're a nation of laws or we're a lawless nation. And you have to decide, what the environment's going to be. And just like Alexander Hamilton said, the greatest respect that anybody can show to this republic is an inviolable respect for the Constitution and the laws of this land. And so I pride myself on that essence. Again, it's kind of interesting. We talk about this battle on 1070. And let me talk just briefly before that. We had a court hearing today, an oral argument with, again, in behalf of employer sanctions, which was my bill, House Bill 2779. It's kind of interesting we have these battles, that we'd have folks who continue to fight every effort to enforce our laws while we ignore the damage to this republic. Now, and of course, there's agendas, and I understand good people can disagree. But it's still rather amazing to me, that we have to have battles about what is existing law, whether we should enforce it. That somehow we have those folks that would think that it's a purview of just the federal government. And again, just a little constitutional review. To every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. That means a sovereign form of government, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. And for those folks, and most of you weren't around when the Constitution was written and the Republic was formed. My kids think that some of us were around back then. But the truth is, the states got together and created the federal government. And we gave them certain limited but delegated responsibilities. All others are reserved for the states, called inherent authority, not delegated, but inherent authority. The states created the federal government, and the federal government has not been well behaved. And if there was ever a time for a parent to give time out to a child, it's now. The reason we had this election, I think, this last November, and that things went the way they did, because we're a little concerned about the direction our government is going, and we're not happy about it. This is rather a long battle, and it's kind of interesting, the debate today on employer sanctions. The states have never been preempted from enforcing federal law. And again, absent the preemption, And they could have done that. You know, immigration or naturalization, actually assumed to be immigration, is a delegated responsibility of Congress. But that's the regulatory function, not the enforcement. States have inherent authority under their police powers to enforce these laws as if they were written into state statute. It's interesting that you have to continue to educate people on states' inherent responsibility and obligation. It's kind of interesting. Today, it was, I believe it was Judge Scalia that commented the fact that Arizona was obligated to enforce these laws. You know, because nobody, in the time that these laws were written, like in 1986 when the Immigration Control Act was written, would have assumed that the federal government would be so derelict in enforcing its laws that absolutely does not enforce them in many cases. In fact, as you know, sanctuary policies are illegal in this country. Under 8 U.S.C. 1644 and 1373, it is a crime to have a policy that restricts law enforcement from enforcing the law. Yet we have them all over this country, including this city, and in Houston and Dallas and San Francisco and in L.A. and San Diego and Phoenix and Chandler and Tempe and Boston and Seattle, and you can go, and I can continue to name them. They're illegal. Yet none of those cities have been sued by our federal government for violating the law. Yet Arizona, who chooses to enforce the law, is sued. This is the first time in the history of the United States a sitting president has chosen to side with a foreign government to sue its own citizens. Simply outrageous and not to be tolerated. But it was interesting today in the debate, and I think the decision will go well. You've got to remember, employer sanctions have already been upheld by a district judge, Judge Neil Wake, who wrote very cleverly on our responsibility to enforce the law and the impact of not enforcing it. And he was very careful in his articulation of the impact of not enforcing these laws. And then it was upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court on Appeal. So that was pretty interesting, to say the least. And so I would assume the U.S. Supreme Court will uphold that decision, as they were well written. But at best today, in listening to the argument, at worst, I should say, I think you'd get a 4-4 decision, but I think we'll end up with a 5-3 decision out of the U.S. Supreme Court on employer sanctions. But the only time there's even been an indication of preemption is in the employer sanctions area, where Congress has carved out and said we don't want the states to impose additional fees or fines, no jail penalties, if you will, against those who hire illegal aliens. But you can deal with it in terms of licensing or the like. And Arizona has chosen to do that. We were very careful when we wrote that. And I wrote that bill, worked on it for 2 to 3 years before we had it passed. And signed by, again, your Homeland Security Director, Janet Napolitano. And not to throw too many rocks, but people have to understand why that was signed. I don't think she was very enamored with it then, is probably not now. But she signed it because I've been very successful at the Citizens Initiative route in Arizona, and I had such a movement going again, a much tougher bill on employer sanctions. And the compromise was she would sign House Bill 2779 if the Citizens Initiative didn't go forward. And I thought it was a fair compromise. So anyway, as we move forward, again, trying to enforce the law, it's kind of interesting. 1070 is simply the elimination of those illegal sanctuary policies that I've just talked about. 1070 does not regulate immigration. It enforces it, a state's inherent responsibility. And this is more of a battle of states' rights than it is almost of anything else. Arizona's right to enforce its laws. Arizona's right to secure safe neighborhoods. Arizona's right. It's kind of interesting to note that during the debate of 1070, a good friend of mine, Rob Krentz, a rancher on the border, right after your Homeland Security Director said the borders are more secure than ever, was murdered. It's kind of interesting that the response to this violence coming across that border, we've had beheadings in Chandler, we've had contract killings from the drug cartels around Arizona, including Riso one in Casa Grande. It's kind of interesting that our federal government's response to that was to post signs as close as 30 miles from Phoenix. To our citizens, stay out, dangerous. Wow, how embarrassing that we would succeed our land to a foreign country simply by posting it that it's no longer are Americans welcome or should they be trespassing in that area because it's dangerous? So it's kind of interesting. We head down this battle as we see the battle that's running here, and Arizona's role in it. And I'm grateful for the fact that about 25 states are writing legislation modeled after 1070. California's just dropped a citizens initiative because they have a legislature they can't get out of, and they know that. But the citizens will pass that if they get it on the ballot. I can almost guarantee that. The polls are very strong across this nation, 3-1 support 1070. And Americans overwhelmingly want our borders secured and our laws enforced. And I can go through the statistics for you, but I'll get more into the meat of it. But you have to understand the impact of Arizona. And again, unlike Vegas, what goes on in Arizona doesn't stay in Arizona. And what's going on in Arizona isn't right. We have the cost, about $2.7 billion to educate, medicate, and incarcerate illegal aliens in the state of Arizona. 12 Phoenix police officers have been either murdered or maimed by illegal aliens. That's just Phoenix. Recently, and it's kind of interesting, the impact is not even fully, and I'll talk about what parts are in place, but it's not even fully in place yet. By the way, there's 10 sections to 1070. 6 of them are fully enforced. The most critical parts are in play today, are the law today as of July 29th. One is the purpose for 1070 was to eliminate illegal sanctuary policies in that state. That is in place. Sanctuary policies in the state of Arizona are illegal. Citizens, you know that little phrase in our founding document called We the People? Citizens in the state of Arizona, we the people, will sue any entity that has a policy that restricts the enforcement of immigration law to the full extent of the law. That is the current law in Arizona today. It is illegal to have those policies, and we the citizens will take action against our government for failing to enforce our laws, protect our neighborhoods, and do what they should be doing. And again, the states are just responsible. And I appreciate some of the comments made today with employer sanctions, very similar to the debate going on in 1070. And that would be the obligation the states have. How long do we sit on the sidelines and watch the destruction of our neighborhoods, the destruction of this republic without doing something about it? And we think it's somebody else's job. It's kind of like Hurricane Katrina. The failure's been at the federal, the state, and the local levels. The states are just as responsible for letting things get this bad. So anyways, we go through this battle that I believe is of epic proportion. It's kind of interesting. They would have those people to defend lawbreakers over law keepers, and they would ignore the damage to this country. It's kind of interesting also that many folks believe that 1070 has been set aside, not in play. And I'll get to the provisions that were temporarily enjoined, and they were not the meat of the bill, as the media would have you believe. Of course, the media would have you believe this is a controversial bill, in spite of the fact it's supported 3-1 across America. But anyway, as we go through this battle, it's kind of interesting. It's not even fully in play. The media would have you believe that not much of it is in play yet. According to them, and I don't know who's got the clicker at the border, but over 100,000 illegal aliens have left the state of Arizona. So do we know law works? Absolutely. We don't need comprehensive reform, code word amnesty. We need comprehensive enforcement. We have good laws. It's about time we make those folks engaged. They have the responsibility to take an oath of office, to uphold that oath. And again, we have a lot of disdain for our politicians in this country, and I understand why. Maybe if you want to remove that disdain, then maybe all they would need to do is if they take a promise to secure the border, they secure it. If they make a promise to enforce the laws, they enforce it. If they take an oath of office, maybe they ought to keep it. I think the answer is pretty simple when it comes to the trust and integrity we place in those folks that are supposed to be the stewards of our freedom and the stewards of protecting this republic. I think it's pretty clear. And again, this is an easy subject to go on and on about. But I want to tell you some real sad, real-life stories. Not only was Rob Krentz murdered during the debate of 1070, and Rob was a friend, and Sue, his wife, has just got as leathery skin as he does because she's out by his side every day working that ranch. She no longer has Rob to stand by her side, her soulmate. And yet, but apparently that's okay to some folks because it's just collateral damage as they promote their agenda of either cheap labor or cheap votes. And it's pretty outrageous to me that we ignore the other damage and the victims. Many of them I know personally, have been to their funerals, have been to their hospital beds while they've been the victims. To me, that's not okay. And my commitment to America and to Arizona is that I will not retreat from this battle until it's solved. I will not apologize for demanding our laws be enforced. That is my job. I take an oath of office and I take it seriously. As you look at this damage throughout this country, and I could name lots of victims and lots of crimes. In fact, let me tell you a quick story, if I might, and I want to make sure.
You're speaking for two people.
Well, I don't know that I can speak for Steve King. I do admire Congressman King, and I hope he makes it here. But it's kind of interesting as we've been in this battle. I've been in this battle for over a quarter of a century. Been very vigilant. And not just this battle. It's not my only issue. My whole issue is the founding principle of this country: protect your life, your liberty, and your property. Not to give you stuff, not to reward you with other people's stuff, redistribution of wealth. My job is to protect those most vital interests, those God-given rights you as citizens have. And I do that from one end to the other as I fight this battle. But it seems like the battle I get drawn into the most is this one, because I've been vigilant on the rule of law. But in 2004, while I was debating this very simple issue, and I stood at the podium here in Washington, D.C., in fact, at the Brookings Institute, debating this very issue. I was handed a note to call home. Critical, emergency, call now. Wow. As Tom mentioned, I've got 5 children. Just had my 14th grandchild. Was just delivered on the 1st of December. So anyway, your first thing comes to your mind is one of your children, one of your grandchildren. But I never thought about. I have 2 boys in law enforcement, and never really thought about my boys in law enforcement. I know they're in a business that I've grown up in, love and appreciate, and grateful for the risks. In fact, I've also, have been shot and injured in line of duty, a finger shot off and shot through the chest. And by the way, I tell people I owe my life to the Republican Party. If I had had a heart, I'd be dead today. So, just teasing. I actually have a big heart. But anyway, I was handed a note while I'm standing there at the Brookings Institute debating this issue. And I called home. Sure sounded important. I stepped from the podium, literally was at the podium, stepped from the podium to find a phone to call home. I now carry a cell phone. I didn't then. And so anyway, I speak to my wife, Lou, and I said, wow, I've got this note. She said, Russell, you're not going to believe it. Sean's been shot. He's one of my boys in law enforcement, works for the sheriff's office, being air-evac to a hospital. I don't know how bad. I don't have the detail. I'll get it I'll get it for you, but if you'll find a ride home. So anyway, I start changing airplane flights so I can get home as soon as I can get home. And about an hour later, she catches up to me to inform me that, and she says, this is going to make you mad. Sean was shot by an illegal alien that was wanted already on homicide charges, involved in drug trafficking, apparently a job that Americans won't do. Now, my son is okay today, and I'm grateful for that. But I've been to many a bedside where they didn't make it. That spouse isn't going to have that member return to their family. And I'm very grateful for that. But the truth is, I'm not mad at that young man. Is he in prison where he belongs? Absolutely. You know who I'm upset with? My government. That should have never happened. That's where the anger ought to be. We have good laws, and yet we have let our politicians sit on the sideline and pontificate, put policies into place that put handcuffs on our law enforcement. Now, I believe in handcuffs. I've used them most of my life, but they ought to be on bad guys, not on the good guys. You need to take them off from law enforcement and put them on those who violate our laws. Illegal is illegal. Arizona didn't make illegal illegal. It was already illegal. And illegal is not a race. It's a crime, and it must be enforced. You cannot ignore the damage to America. And even those good people, if you will, are still criminals. It's against the law to break into this country. But even they, in a 26-year high in unemployment, Americans, they can't find work. It's okay to let people come in and create what I call job theft. It's illegal for them to be employed. It's illegal for them to have those jobs and take from Americans. And I'm a bad guy for defending Americans, for defending American workers, for defending the rule of law. By some folks, I am, apparently. And that's unfortunate. I will continue to be vigilant in this battle until this battle is solved. And that doesn't mean my weak-kneed politicians in Congress that would sell out America to buy votes We pander to lawbreakers over law keepers. It means enforcing our laws. We have good laws. We let more people into this country legally than every other civilized or developed nation combined. We're a generous nation, but you have to have the permission slip to enter this country. And let me just tell you quick statistics. Those 100,000 that apparently have left Arizona as a result of the threat of these laws being enforced, and there is some vigilance. Sheriff Joe and others are enforcing these laws to some degree, significantly in some cases. Violent crime is down 26% in many cities in Arizona. Homicide, I talked to a homicide detective in the city of Phoenix the other day, and he said he's looking for work. We were teasing a little bit, and I said, "You're looking for work?" He said, "Yeah. I'm afraid they're going to transfer me." He said, "My job is drying up. Hard homicides are down over 50%. Wow, but nobody wants to talk about that, do they? Nobody wants to talk the value of safe neighborhoods, safe streets, less homicide. We just did a study out of Maricopa County Jail, which is about 70% of the state's population. That demographic, the illegal alien demographic, commit violent crimes at about 2.5 times that of any other demographic. And again, even the so-called good guys, and they're not all bad guys. It's our fault they're coming. They break across that border, we give them a job, free education, free health care. We have handcuffs on our law enforcement. I'd probably come too. It's inappropriate, though. You're taking jobs from Americans that are illegal. It's a felony to hire them. Again, the laws must be enforced. What we need in this country is comprehensive enforcement. I think it's pretty clear. If you really want to talk about jobs, the 17 to 30 million Americans that are employed in this country, deport an illegal alien today, hire an American tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator Pearce. Thank you. You're the incoming Senate President in Arizona, the state Senate there. Obviously, you've been a leader on this issue in Arizona, which is at the tip of the spear in terms of the battle over illegal immigration. As the Bush administration, as the Obama administration, have officials from either of those administrations over the years come and talk to you and say, what is it you need? What is it we can do? Has there ever been any reaching out by either administration? And I'm not saying this to put the Obama administration on the spot, because I'm presuming it was as bad during the Bush administration as well. But
I was never sued by the Bush administration
you were
for
never
enforcing
sued,
the law, but they didn't offer any more help either, though. I have to agree. But they were more vigilant in at least the enforcement of worksite enforcement. Did they do what they should have? No, because it continue. When you offer rewards for those who break our laws, you're going to get more lawbreakers. And he was as vigilant as pushing amnesty as this administration is. They're close to it. So that answer is unfortunately no. I mean, the only response I've gotten from Obama is subpoenas, for Arizona to appear and defend their reasoning for protecting our citizens and our borders.
Well, presumably, in light of your new position, you're going to be able to do more things legislatively. Although it's kind of hard to top your record as it is. Was it 4 state initiatives and 2 or 3 key legislative reforms? What other areas related to immigration enforcement can you talk about that you might be legislating in over the next year or two?
Well, again, until the problem's solved, you can't retreat from this issue. And there are some major issues, and let me tell you, very simple. And people will never print, the complete truth, which is unfortunate. And they would have one believe that he has. Again, I've demonstrated I don't have a heart, I guess, but the truth is, I don't know of anybody who doesn't have an appreciation for good people, wherever they come from. And we love immigrants. I embrace immigration. That's a legal term. And I've always admired those who follow the rules and do the right things. And I know it's a struggle, and I know there's a line, and I know it's costly. But there's 5 billion people worse off than Mexico, so you just can't allow. And with our welfare state that we've created, both nationally and in our states, you can't afford the burden that comes with that and the destruction. It just simply can't sustain what's going on. So you have to stand up for these laws and enforce them. But there are other things that need to be done. And again, when you talk about unfairness, one of probably the most misunderstood, I think by design, is the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was written, as you know, as a response to a terrible Supreme Court decision called the Dred Scott decision, where they basically said African Americans aren't complete people. And a Republican Congress, and I emphasize that, responded with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And they thought that was an outrageous decision, and it was. And they responded with the Civil Rights Act. And what they decided to do, this same Congress said, let's give it constitutional protection. So then they wrote the 14th Amendment to codify the Civil Rights Act, to give it the constitutional protection they thought it should have. You know, and you need to read that carefully when you read it, and the debate around it. Jacob Howard's one of the authors of the 14th Amendment on the floor of the Senate, said, made it very clear, this does not apply to foreigners or aliens. And yet we continue to misinterpret that. It was to simply restore the dignity and the right of African Americans as after the Civil War to be recognized in their legitimate place as citizens of this country with all the rights and benefits that come with that citizenship. Do you know that the American Indians were not recognized as citizens after the 14th Amendment? It took 3 congressional acts to recognize them, 3 separate congressional acts to give them citizenship status. And the reason is because there was a concern about jurisdiction. The 14th Amendment talks about born, nationalized, and for whom we have jurisdiction. And they were born on a sovereign nation, a reservation, if you will, and members of a tribe. So they were very clearly were not recognized as citizens of this country, and Congress had to act because there were 2 things. Now, there were no illegal aliens at the time the 14th Amendment was written. None. It was no crime against entering the country, in the country. But there were conditions placed on citizenship. People need to understand that. And those conditions were legal domicile and allegiance. And they didn't fall into that category, the Indians, they felt like, because of their sovereign nation status and members of a tribe. It's pretty clear, and I know that common sense is a little void. I know Eric Holder has never read probably 1070 to date, let alone when he's caught off guard not having read it. But we have a Constitution for those that are willing to read it, and those that understand the debate. It's pretty clear it was never intended for those that have allegiance to another country, that are citizens of another country, to just by location, by your GPS location, there you're declared a citizen of this country. It was never intended. It's an unconstitutional declaration of citizenship to those born to non-citizens, and it needs to be corrected. And it does not take a constitutional amendment. At the end of the 14th Amendment, it's very clear the Congress will regulate this amendment by law. All it takes is clarification. Maybe Congress just ought to do some of their job once in a while and fix the wrongs. You can't continue to expect our borders to be secure, this nation have the respect for laws, when you reward people for breaking our laws. Simply makes no sense. And the cost is in the billions of dollars every year, just in the birthing cost of those who break into our country and have children. And that ranges those ranges from anywhere from 300,000 to 700,000 of these illegal births to illegal aliens in our country every year. And you have nothing else people ought to recognize, not only the insanity and the misapplication of this law, but the cost to the taxpayers for this abuse. And it needs to be fixed. And I stand on the side of taxpayers and the rule of law on all these issues.
Could you please talk about, we kind of see stories about it, but it seems far away, especially here in Washington, about the war.
I thought it was just your heart when it was cold here in Washington, but I stood outside the airport last night with that wind chill. I couldn't hardly move to the cab. Of course, I'm an Arizona boy, but I tell you, this is some cold weather, Tom.
Yeah, well, we don't like it either. The Civil War in Mexico, whatever you want to call it, the drug war, the astonishing rates of levels of violence, the drug trade, which is now tied to human trafficking, which is something that the media doesn't like to report on. It's one and the same. Is the drug war, the violence where thousands of people are being killed in the most horrific ways, is it creeping into the United States? Or is there something we need to know about that we don't know about here in Washington?
Tom, you couldn't ask a more pointed question. Let me tell you what's going on, and it's not creeping into the United States. It has crept in a long time ago into the United States. Out of the hundreds of thousands of gang members in the United States, Records would show you that 75 to 85% of those are illegal aliens in the violent gangs across here, MS-13 and a couple others, the most prominent. You know, violent crime is up, and again, crime is down overall, but not in these demographic numbers. And people understand. So there's been 27,000 homicides since 2007 along that border, mostly on the Mexican side. But you have to recognize the crime that's coming with it across these borders over here. Phoenix has been recognized #2 in the world in kidnappings. You know, again, that demographic commits violent crimes at 2.5 times that of any other demographic. Violent crime, as these numbers have gone down, the direct correlation to the illegal aliens leaving and violent crime reduction is there's a direct nexus to that. Again, we've had about 100,000 leave the state, over 3 times that of any other state, and our crime rates are dropping in proportionate to those reduced numbers. So when you talk about that, and we had a decapitation in Chandler just the other day by drug cartel members, suspected they're illegal aliens, suspected being connected to that. We had a contract killing just a few weeks ago in Casa Grande, drug cartel. They know that information for a fact. The guy was working with local law enforcement. I just talked to Sheriff Paul Babu the other day. We've had assassins, trained assassins, as close as 30 miles from Phoenix that Homeland Security had information on to take out other drug cartels. And I got to remember, this is way into Arizona, you know, stationed in the mountains along these known corridors for trafficking of both humans and drugs. And yet they didn't tell Sheriff Paul Babu this for some time. This information was kept fairly confidential for a period of time, unfortunately, not even let the local sheriff of this county know that there are trained assassins in his county to take out drug cartels. But trust me, anybody that's in the way is also going to be a victim, anybody that gets in that path. And what's going on across this country is outrageous. Now, let's define terrorism. I mean, it's not just the guys that want to blow up Twin Towers. When you have that massive amount of bad guys coming in, they have no respect for law, the most violent, bloodiest gangs we've known in the history of this country, that mostly are illegal. Again, the records show that about 57% of them, of the violent gang members, are from Mexico, about 15% from El Salvador, about 5% from Honduras, of those that have been identified as these gangs. And folks, this is a border that has no control. I ride that border with these ranchers on occasion. I go on horseback with them on occasion and ride down there, you know. And these barriers, 2 strands of barbed wire fence in places, it's certainly not a difficult task. There's been 133 nations that have been identified of coming across that southern border. You know, it is one of the greatest threats to our national security that we have, and yet our federal government's response is to do virtually nothing. I work with the Border Patrol very close. The handcuffs that are placed on them, the ability to do their job, they have increased resources, but at the same time, they have pilot programs like in Houston where they're releasing illegal aliens that are in custody. That we have a guy, and I can tell you, Tom Tancredo told me a story the other day that sad again, talk about another sanctuary city, Denver, where they arrested a guy here. I don't know what the time frame is, but just recently apparently, for killing a 5-year-old boy. Been arrested 17 times, never deported. Folks, this is the kind of insanity that must stop. You have a corrupt nation south of that border. I mean, every American ought to worry about what's going on there. The lack of respect. I mean, they just burned down a kindergarten a couple of nights ago. The deaths, the beheadings, the dismemberments, the slaughter that is going on across that border and on this side. And those folks are coming this side. Again, I'm not known for short answers, so I'm not going to make an exception here. Let me tell you, when Rob Krentz was murdered, I had the ranchers come up to the Capitol to give testimony. And they came up, and I had them come up all the way from Sassabee to Douglas, the entire span of that border, to tell what's going on publicly. These are the ranchers that have ranched down their 6 and 7 generations. And I said, yeah, I could tell your story for you. I know most of your stories. I work with them. I work with Glenn Warner. I've worked with Glenn Spencer. I've worked with John Ladd. I work with Roger Barnett. I work with Rob Krentz. I know these ranchers. Like I say, I ride the fence line with them occasionally just to see what's not happening. One of them has identified anywhere from 130 to 1,300 illegal aliens across his ranch daily. Daily. So anyway, I invited them up to tell their stories, and they said, and this was right after your Homeland Security Director, Janet Napolitano, said the borders are more secure than ever. They said, simply not true. They said it is as bad or worse than it's ever been. Their dogs' throats are cut. Their cattle are slaughtered. Their water lines are destroyed. Their fences are cut down. They have their chases across. They hear noises at night. They don't come outside. They pray for daylight. They pray for daylight. They have their doors boarded, their windows boarded. One family, 18 burglars, 3 home invasions, several cars stolen. One rancher told me when he leaves his house, if the wife leaves with him, he has her lay down on the seat of the truck. So nobody knows they're both gone. What a way to live. And our response is to sue Arizona for enforcing its laws. It's pretty sad. None of you would be expected to live like that in your own country.
Well, just one more question before I turn it over to the audience. How would you secure the border? Would you use the military? Do you think it's sounds to me like I mean, personally, I'd use it, but I'd like to know what you're on the front lines. What do you think the most effective way to handle the situation is?
Well, there's several things that need to happen. One is I would use the military on the border. I would never use the military for interior enforcement. I got to tell you, that's how you get corrupt governments in insurrection, and coups going on. It's not the role of interior enforcement ever. But it is the role. In fact, Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution guarantees to every state a protection from invasion. If what's going on across this border, even the Time magazine, certainly not a conservative publication, in their article several years ago called Who Left the Door Open, admits to 5,000 to 10,000 come across that border daily. Daily. Now, folks, if that's not an invasion, and then you'll have to help me define it. So when I would put the military on that border, I'd also put the Department of Public Safety on that border in a more prominent manner. I'd put the Border Patrol on the border. Right now they have this football kind of a game plan where they have some on the border, then they have some that fall back. They have the defensive line. That's our job. We'll be the back, the linebackers. That Border Patrol needs to be on the border, and they need to be line of sight. In other words, they have a visual on that entire border from one end to the other. Now, again, I would build a fence where a fence is practicable, like they did in San Diego, a 2-layered fence with technology and lighting. It absolutely becomes a force multiplier. But as long as you're rewarding people for breaking the law, you're going to have people break the law. So you have to have interior enforcement. The greatest effect is enforcing your laws. But again, you've got to secure those borders also. And I would do that with the military, but I would do that with a secure perimeter too, and that is a fence where a fence is applicable. You can secure the border. Folks, we know you can. We have the resource, the technology, and the ability. And everybody talks about the cost. Let's reverse that just a little bit. What is the cost of not enforcing our borders in enforcing our laws? It's in billions and trillions of dollars. It's in deaths and maimings of citizens, jobs taken from Americans, schools that are imploded, healthcare system that is overloaded. You pay for all of that. So what is the cost for not enforcing? You can't afford it. The cost for enforcing is small and minimal, and it must be enforced immediately.
Well, thank you, Senator Pearce. We appreciate your insights. A powerful presentation. Now I'm going to open up the floor to questions and brief comments, and I encourage you to keep your comment or question brief. It's not an opportunity to make a statement. I think we will have a microphone, so if we do. So wait for the microphone and identify yourself.
If you'll call on them.
And identify yourself. So, and wait for me to call on you. And you raised your hand first. So first, thank you, Mr. Buchanan.
The Section 4 of the Constitution that says that a state has a right to be defended in this manner is said to be not justiciable. That is, nobody can go to court over it. But doesn't it give you the right to act then in your own behalf?
Very good point. Very good point. In fact, it does give the federal government responsibility to protect the states from invasion. But you're right. Also in the Constitution, it says when there is an invasion, the states have a right, even to declare war, if you will. They have a right to protect. Again, we're sovereign states, and you're just like everybody here. We're not citizens of the United States. We use that term a lot. We're actually citizens of one of the several sovereign states. And the sovereign states make up the United States, and it's a partnership. But they have responsibility that we've delegated to them, but the states have responsibility. And you're right. And when the federal government fails to protect the citizens of our state, then the states have a direct responsibility. Why have a National Guard? Why do we have law enforcement? That's why we have a legislature and a governor. And you're right. And the states have an inherent, not delegated, an inherent responsibility to protect the citizens of their state.
Any other questions?
I hope that answered it.
Yes, right here, please. 1 minute. Wait for the microphone, please.
Ann Turner, what do you think the objective of the Obama administration is? It does not seem rational to me that they would be merely compromising the national security of the country on just jobs, but that they have to have some bigger objective in mind to be causing such rampant destruction. It just doesn't seem rational to me, obviously.
Let me just tell you, it doesn't seem rational to me either. I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm certainly not a soothsayer, so I don't know what's in his mind and what his rationale is. But it certainly is in conflict with his oath that he takes. It certainly is one that is ignoring the damage to this country. And you wonder about what's going on in this country. Is it about cheap votes? I mean, he won't get all these folks registered in time for his 2012 election. Is it about cheap labor? Well, 26-year high unemployment? I don't understand it either, because you certainly can't ignore the damage to this country. And I've got statistics that people don't want to hear all day long. I understand that. But if you understand the cost, both in dollars and in lives and in job loss to Americans, it's beyond me. I certainly have no rational answer to why anybody will allow that to go on in a nation and a republic that they love. And again, I have a great love for this republic and the rule of law, and I know that I have an obligation to leave these God inherited rights that were recognized by our founders. I have a right to leave that legacy for my children, my grandchildren, and on. I have an inherent responsibility to the citizens of this country to preserve this republic, and it's no different than when Benjamin Franklin, when he walked out of the Constitutional Convention, and the wife of the Philadelphia mayor, who asked him, "What kind of a government have you given us?" He says, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." It's a fragile form of government, but it's based on the rule of law. So anybody can ignore the damage to this country is beyond me and not respond to it.
Well, my view is that the Obama administration is full of people who are philosophically opposed to our current immigration law. They do not believe that the United States has the moral right to secure its border or to enforce laws against illegal immigration. They do not believe that people who are here illegally ought to have the law enforced against them. And that is why you see this emphasis on only throwing out and deporting, quote, criminals, people who are here illegally who commit other crimes on top of being here illegally. But if you're here illegally, the Obama administration is not interested in enforcing the law against you. In fact, we're learning in Houston and elsewhere, and in this memo I referenced in the beginning of the presentation, that they are stopping enforcement against individuals who are just being deported in the normal course of things. They're dropping the cases altogether, effectively granting amnesty. So they just don't believe in the law, and they're not going to enforce it. And Obama believes that he told John Kyle this, the senator, you're an excellent senator from Arizona, that I'm not going to enforce the law until you guys give me amnesty or comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, that's his.
It has certainly become a culture of corruption, and I don't know how else to put it. When one refuses to recognize the damage to this country and fails to respond to it, whatever their agenda is, it's wrong. I mean, and granted, there are folks who have agendas, whether that's cheap votes or cheap labor. They have an agenda, so they don't really care about the damage or the cost to you as long as they benefit. And that's unfortunate.
And it's perfectly legitimate to take the moral position that you think the laws against illegal aliens ought to be here and let's treat them nice and such. But it seems to me if you're sworn to uphold the law, you have certain obligations, despite whatever personal beliefs you may have as a citizen. Are there any other questions? Yes, right up front here.
I'm just wondering if you'd like
Wait for the microphone, please.
I'm just wondering if you'd like to take this as an opportunity to perhaps clarify what role, if any, the Corrections Corporation for America played in drafting of SB 1070 and ALEC, if they will play any role in the future, and if you will continue to accept money from them, considering the controversy that caused.
Yeah, that was a nice story. That was, if you like fiction, I can show you the whole section of the library has a better choice. That story was simply made up. After I introduced this bill in 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, and 2010, so magically to have assumed that we wrote it in December of 2009 is more than just a stretch. They've never had any role. That's called zero. For those that understand math, that's the very bottom. It has no number to it at all. They had zero role in that. So it's pretty disappointing that people can't find enough real information, that they have to make up stuff to demean what's going on. And it's insulting, and I made that very clear at the time, and I'll make it clear now. It was an absolute lie, that report. Complete manufactured misinformation, and it's pretty disappointing, so I will set the record very straight. Zero role, zero money, zero impact. It was done because it's the right thing to do, and first of all, you know that we don't have a contract to deal with federal prisoners with Corporation Commissioner, whatever the name that you assess to them, we don't have a role with them. The federal government does. So why when the federal government's fighting us, and you'd think I had a partnership with the federal government to employ somebody on a private contract for them, none of it even makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Yes, right here.
Congressman Raul Grijalva introduced a bill, a wilderness bill, and once it's set up, the wilderness bill would be along the border, as I get it, and then there would be the prohibition on vehicular traffic there, which is a common part of wilderness legislation, but that this was, as I understood it, would also essentially prohibit, as part of that, Border Patrol vehicles. And I don't know if that's the current situation, but any reaction to that?
Is this the same Congressman Grijalva that called for a boycott against his own state? Yes. Oh, that guy. Yeah, I do remember him. It's coming. I'm starting to recall now. It's kind of interesting, and if you read that bill, you're right. He was simply wanting to make sure that they can travel in safety as they break our laws. And I understand safety. I appreciate his concern, and I hope that he can get that job of Presidente of Mexico as soon as they afford him the chance to run for it.
Yes, right up front again here, please. Thank you.
Helen Kirkpatrick, I'm a member of Judicial Watch. What is our relationship with the government of Mexico, and what efforts are they making? I came in late, so maybe you already covered this, but it seems to me that we just sort of don't put any pressure on them to clean up their act.
Couldn't agree more with you. I mean, Mexico has a very corrupt government. And I'm not calling every single person. I'm talking about just overall. You don't know the good guys. I talk to the Mexican officials down there, have a good relationship with a bunch of them. Citizens down there are afraid to call their own law enforcement because they don't know who's on their side and who's not. It's a terrible environment, and my heart goes out to those folks, just like the guy who just gave up his life up, apparently willingly, knowing they were going to come after him. But, you know, in the massacre that just happened where he took out some of the drug cartels but lost his own life, a rancher down there, 77-year-old man. It's a sad state down there, and do they have an obligation to clean up their act? But instead, what you find them doing is printing pamphlets, what they were doing a couple of years ago, advising people how to break into America and get free stuff. I don't call that a good neighbor. You know, so yeah, they ought to be cleaning up their act because you have a government, again, that apologizes for America everywhere they go instead of demanding that our neighbors be respectful of their neighbors. And instead of giving them foreign aid, maybe we ought to tell them, just like your children, if you don't behave, there's no tuition. You don't come home on time, you don't get to drive the family car. I mean, maybe there ought to be some consequence for misbehavior. And same with our own federal government, It's, there's a time to have a little time out. We're the parent, same with our federal government. It's time to give our federal government a little time out.
Okay.
They've been misbehaved.
It's in the back corner there.
Thanks. I'm Peter Brimmel. I'm the editor of VDare.com. Senator, you mentioned job theft. The great bulk of job theft, of course, comes from legal immigration. Are you in favor of a moratorium on legal immigration until unemployment falls to more normal levels?
I do think there ought to be a moratorium maybe until we get our act together. Right now, you've got an overloaded system. Again, and people complain about the system, we're allowing people to come through without complete background checks. We're letting people overstay their visas. Hundreds of thousands of them that come to this country. We have no idea where they're at. Of course, we can track a cow with mad cow disease, where it came from, but somehow we can't track these folks that are in our country. There ought to be a timeout all the way around until we get our arms around national security. But I don't want to mix the two issues. What I'm fighting against, and that's a congressional issue, and they ought to be dealing with it. But the states can't regulate immigration. Granted, we can put pressure on our congressmen to do the right thing, though. But the states can enforce the laws. And that's what's frustrating to me, that the states would have you believe that they have to wait for a permission slip from Congress and for the federal government. It's just like a 287G. You don't need a 287G. That's post-arrest. We don't need a permission slip from government to enforce the law. You don't need an MOU and IGA for the federal government to enforce the law. So I would like states to do their job, and that's simply enforce the law. And Congress has passed many an act to incentivize states to enforce the law, not the opposite of restricting, but to incentivize. That's why I have a 24/7 hotline for law enforcement to call. They wouldn't have that if they didn't think law enforcement should be using it to call. We've done lots of things to make sure, but yet we ignore those principles all the time. But on the legal immigration side, I don't disagree. We have jobs that pay less today than they did 20 years ago, and it's in part because of the illegal alien. You can't compete with third world wages, and in part because of the way we're using our H-1, and H-2A visa process in terms of importing guys. In India, you get $5,000 a year for being an engineer. In America, it's $100,000. I'd come too. And we are depriving Americans of those good-paying jobs. And there ought to be a little bit of a timeout, probably, that we recognize and get arms around this problem.
Well, I tell you what, we don't have much time, so what I'm going to do is ask those of you who have remaining questions to ask them quickly, and we'll track them all. We'll try to answer them all.
And I apologize, Tom. I think most of that's my fault. I think my answers have been a little longer than most of the questions.
We've got a record amount of questions in for the panel of this nature. So I thought we had some hands in the back. Is there anyone interested in the back and asking a question that had their hand up earlier? Already in the back, Andrew, there. And I'll just ask the question briefly, then we'll get the other questions, and we'll take them all at once.
Senator, as it relates to when you were drafting the legislation in 2005, 6, 7, and 8, did you ever enlist the assistance of other border states? Did you talk to them about it? Did they try to co-opt what you did? And why has this administration chosen to pick, I guess I could say, on Arizona in this regard?
Okay. We'll cover that. Over here.
Good question.
We have 3 more here, so let's do this quickly.
Right.
2 in the front and 1 in the back, and that's it.
I work for Delegate Pat McDonough in Maryland, and he's introduced the Arizona bill for Maryland on Friday. I'm curious how many other states are introducing bills similar to SB 1070. And also, we've asked, Delegate McDonough has given a formal request to Eric Holder and Obama to come in and sue Maryland because we are in violation of the sanctuary law, and we can't get them to sue us. What can we do to do that?
We'll sue you. How's that? And right front here had another question, yeah.
Hi, yes. My question is, considering that the DREAM Act might come up for a vote this week in the House or the Senate, I was wondering how you perceive the federal government should be enforcing immigration law, and at the same time simultaneously balance this and distinguish between lawbreakers who intentionally break the law and those who come unintentionally.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and 1 more in the back, and then we'll try to wrap it all up in a bow.
My name is Kaylin Ford. I'm a reporter with RTTV. Going along with the DREAM Act question, there's a provision in the DREAM Act that says that citizenship can also be earned through military service, and I was wondering if you could comment on whether illegal immigrants have a place in the military and whether that's in our national security interest or in the interest of the United States. Thank you.
Well, why don't we go backwards, and why don't you talk about the DREAM Act and then what other states are doing and why poor Arizona is being picked on?
Yeah, first of all, the DREAM Act again is it's a nice name. It sounds very heartfelt name. Kind of reminds me of the Students for Democratic Society. It was anything but a good organization. You have to be very careful here. If you read the DREAM Act, it's simply amnesty. You're going to reward people, and it's people that come here before, since they're 16. Not all were little victims brought here, young kids. And you have to hold the parents accountable, not me, for enforcing my laws. I didn't put them in that position. When you break the law, there are consequences. I've put in my career lots of people that I think are probably good family people for DUI, for other crimes, but they go to jail. They break the law. We send our military overseas today. They don't get to take their families with them. They go overseas to defend this freedom. When you break the law, there are consequences, and I'm not willing to carve out exceptions for this group or that group. I want my laws enforced. I do not support the DREAM Act. It gives illegal aliens a leg up even over our own citizens. If you're from a bordering state, you pay out-of-state tuition. But if you're in the country illegally, I give you in-state tuition, additional benefit over citizens. It's absolutely outrageous. It's simply a backdoor amnesty for those who have broken our laws. And are the good people mixed up in that? I talked to a young gal just the other day in Arizona, and I actually got very teary-eyed with her because I could tell this was a sweetheart of a gal who admitted that she had been brought here, and had gone through high school. I don't remember what age she had brought here, but she had at least completed high school here and was an honor student. And you can't help when you take individual stories like that and not have a heart. But you have to apply the law fairly and appropriately. It's kind of like being a mom. Sometimes you got to make the tough decision. I'm willing to make that tough decision. I do not support the DREAM Act or any form of amnesty.
What other states are doing the Arizona bill or similar like it? How many other states are using?
About 25 states in count today are writing model legislation modeled after 1070. A couple of states are doing the citizens initiative route because they have a legislature they can't even get it started in. So I'm very proud of that, and I think more will do that too. I think that it's on the rise, and I suspect Mama will wear out of legal staff to sue all 25, 27 of us. But I agree, I appreciate the challenge, and mine is the same thing too. A little levity is okay, I hope, because I like to have fun with most things. But I can tell you the best thing about 1070 is Obama may not be visiting Arizona because we actually require papers now. Just a little levity. Gotta have a little fun with this.
Are you working with the other border states there? Is there a coalition, perhaps? I mean, California is.
This was to your question, kind of back there.
Maybe they're better off with illegal aliens running California the way it's being run now, but
yeah, I'm not sure they're not in charge.
There are great people in Arizona, in California, who are.
I work with folks all across this country, and I work with good patriots from coast to coast. And I'm grateful that I'm able to be a part of this parade and in the front of this parade. This is about taking back our country. And I have worked with other states, and they have not risen to the level of doing some of the things that I've encouraged them to do until now. 14 states are going to introduce legislation dealing with the 14th Amendment in a very unique and constitutional way. 25 states, like you see, are writing legislation modeled after 1070. Other states have modeled legislation that I wrote in 2004 called the Arizona Citizens and Taxpayers Protection Act, normally known as Prop 200. This simply was to stop voter fraud and welfare fraud. I know it's a novel idea that you actually have to be a citizen to vote, but I think our founders had decided that some time back. Anybody here from Chicago? Always want to be gentle with Chicago folks. But in Arizona, we decided that once you're dead, you ought to stop voting, and you ought to only get a vote once, and you ought to be a citizen. And so we've done some things to put that kind of policy into place, too, and we're being sued on that, too. In fact, I feel pretty proud of the 3 major cases going before the Supreme Court. About 5 of them, 3 of them are mine. So I guess I'll get to know the justices personally on a kind of a personal level here soon.
Well, we're, thank you, State Senator Russell Pearce from Arizona. We appreciate your time and insight, and I know Judicial Watch and its supporters were happy to be associated with you and to be able to represent you.
Tom, just really quick, can I just
Sure.
at least tell you my thanks? Tom and I were talking about this earlier. We've been in an environment where the good guys are sued no matter what you do today. Mauled off the ACLU, some of the most anti-American pro-lawbreaker organizations I know. And I'm so grateful for finally folks like Judicial Watch that have stepped up to the plate on behalf of the taxpayers and government corruption. Government corruption. It is wrong. It's got to be stopped. And I know we have elections, and sometimes, and sometimes we still put the scoundrels back in office, and that's still our job. I mean, but I just want to say thank you to the Judicial Watch. No, they'll say they've supported me in 1070 and written briefs on my behalf. On employer sanctions, have written briefs on my behalf. But more importantly, I have watched their work around this country and their vigilance for descending justice, for defending and going after corruption at levels of public officials. And I'm grateful. So, Tom, my hat is off to you, my appreciation for you, and God bless Judicial Watch and organizations like-minded.
Well, that was very kind of you to say. Thank you very much.